week. What are you waiting for? Visit Carpetland Furnitureland, West Street, Ramsey.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
Good afternoon, welcome to the Mannin Line. It's 7 minutes past 12 midday. In session today with Dr. Alex Allinson, Minister of Education, Sport and Culture, Ramsey MHK. Just first of all, a note on the results and the COVID information. 333 people are waiting for the result of a test. 376 people booked in for a test today. There were 2 new cases announced yesterday at 4 o'clock. So we now have 3 active cases in the community. 61,314 people have had a first dose of vaccine. 28,402 have had a second dose. 61 people are booked in during the next 7 days for a vaccination. We're showing 10,184 shots of vaccine in stock. Currently it's 37% Pfizer and 63% Oxford AstraZeneca. Dr. Allinson's with us. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
The Moderna's on the way. Can you tell us what's the difference between Moderna and the other 2?
It's just a different manufacturer, so it's very similar to the Pfizer vaccine. It's a messenger RNA vaccine. Very effective. Again, Moderna was manufactured, I think, in the United States, so it's taken a bit of a while to get over here and get regulated. But it gives us another option, really, to vaccinate people. So again, Moderna is going to be particularly set aside for those younger people who perhaps don't want or can't take the Oxford AstraZeneca, because there are still concerns about the very, very rare risk of blood clots. And so Moderna will fit in with the Pfizer as another weapon in our armoury against COVID.
How young would somebody have to be before they need to be vaccinated?
That's a very good question, and that comes down to the licensing, so the legal requirements that are agreed between the regulators in the United Kingdom, the MHRA, and the manufacturer. Now, when all these vaccines started, the cut-off, all the clinical trials were over 16 and then over 18 for the AstraZeneca. What's happened in the United States is Pfizer have applied for a license and been granted a license from 12 years upwards, which offers the opportunity to vaccinate secondary school pupils. Now, we know that whilst children are very rare to get serious complications of COVID vaccination, they can still catch it, they can still get unwell, and there are concerns about the risks of long COVID in young people. So the option to be able to vaccinate people from the age of 12 is really quite appealing if we're going to try to vaccinate as many people as possible. And I know the Health Minister has said as soon as we can, we will offer that. But obviously we have to wait for supplies, and we know all around the world that there are supply shortages of these vaccines.
Will that need parental permission for somebody below the age of 16?
Absolutely. I think our government has been quite consistent that we would not force people to take a vaccine. It's completely up to them. We will provide as much information as possible. And as with other vaccines given to children and young people, whether it be a tetanus booster or HPV or measles, mumps and rubella, we have to have parental consent. And so once we get to that stage, parents will be getting letters to see if they are willing to have their child vaccinated. And all the information will be there to make that decision for them.
Now, you worked in paediatrics for a long time. What's the current state of play with vaccinations for newborns? What are the vaccines that children, young people are offered currently?
There are a range of them. Most of them are dealing with those illnesses that can potentially be fatal. So you've got the ones we've always been used to, such as tetanus, diphtheria, polio, pertussis, whooping cough. But on top of that, we've got vaccinations against the various forms of meningitis. We've also got vaccinations in terms of pneumococcal pneumonia as well, and then going on to measles, mumps and rubella, and then going on to HPV, human papillomavirus, which we know causes cervical cancer in women. So if we can vaccinate young girls, they're protected against that. But we also know that in men as well, it's one of the leading causes of throat cancer. HPV. So by rolling out that vaccination to both men and women at an early stage, hopefully we can prevent cancers happening later on in life. So it's a two-pronged attack, and I think what we'll see after the events of this year is a real sort of boost to vaccine research, vaccine technology. We've already seen vaccines being developed for HIV, vaccines being developed for malaria, and with the interest in genomic sequencing, the interest in vaccinations, particularly the messenger RNA vaccines, we'll be looking now at not only treating diseases, but also theoretically also preventing some of the cancers that we know are resulting from genetic mutations.
You mentioned HIV, which as a pandemic hasn't gone away, it's still around the world. What's the state of play with HIV vaccines? The vaccines have been trialled. There's been some promising results, but we haven't got there yet. What we have got with HIV, and again, we've often said this is the first pandemic we've had for a generation. If you watch programs like It's a Sin, you realise that actually we did have a pandemic back in the 80s that affected a subsection of our population. And that subsection included people with haemophilia, included people who were contaminated by blood transfusions as well, who developed HIV and AIDS. And when I was in training and in my early medical career, I was working in central London and would go onto the HIV wards. And I was seeing people my age having illnesses of decades later, pneumococcal pneumonias, toxoplasmosis affecting their brains, these very rare diseases, because they were immune suppressed, were killing them. What we now know is people can live with HIV/AIDS because we have the treatment for it. We don't quite have the cure, although 2 people have been cured by having bone marrow replacements after total body irradiation for other reasons. And we also have what's known as PrEP, which is a prophylactic treatment to stop you getting AIDS or to stop you becoming HIV positive if you've been exposed. So there are a range of treatments available. Hopefully we will get a vaccine to this so we can try to eradicate it. But again, in the same with coronavirus, there's a huge disparity between countries. You've got a relatively affluent Western countries who can offer retroviral treatment to all the people with HIV/AIDS, who can offer testing to all those people who think they're at risk. But then you've got large sections of the world where there is no treatment, there is no testing, and so it is still a major problem. Okay, to the Isle of Man, Bill drops a note in just to say, could you ask Dr. Allinson, do we know how many cases of normal flu there have been on the Isle of Man in the last year or so? And do we know how many people, and again, this is a fairly morbid statistic, but how many people usually died through flu and pneumonia and have more died through coronavirus?
I'd just like to thank Bill for that fascinating question, because I was a bit shocked after Christmas to read an article in the British Medical Journal that said basically in terms of UK, we haven't had any flu this winter. There hasn't been any perceptible cases of influenza in the United Kingdom this winter. Why? Because everyone's been keeping apart those universal precautions, not coughing over each other, washing your hands, staying at home if you're unwell. We've been looking for a cure for the common cold. That's it.
Same on the Isle of Man, no flu.
Very, very little influenza.
As a GP,
here.
Have you ever seen that before?
No, we've had some good years whereby it's been fairly uncommon, but you've always had cases. I mean, the reality is that we never really test for influenza unless people get seriously unwell and end up in hospital, and then they'll have the viral testing. But because of what our community has done, we've eradicated flu this year. It just hasn't happened. It hasn't been there. People have been getting lots of other infections,
urinary
infections, things like that.
Isn't it?
It is. Now, so in answer to the question, how many people would normally die from flu? I don't know the figures on the Isle of Man. It would be a number, certainly. We know that on average in the United Kingdom as a whole, about 20,000 people die every winter from flu. So that would translate to probably a dozen or so on the Isle of Man who perhaps haven't died this winter because they haven't had influenza. But again, flu predominantly affects older people who have got pre-existing medical conditions. The difference with coronavirus is, one, it affects younger people. It affects people sometimes without those pre-existing medical conditions. But also when they get unwell, they get seriously unwell and end up on ITU. This is SARS. This is the pictures we were seeing from Southeast Asia 5-6 years ago. It can completely disrupt your healthcare system. It can affect anyone from any background, but particularly healthcare workers are at risk as well. And one of the things I think we should be very proud of on the Isle of Man is when you look at the number of cases we've had amongst healthcare workers here, it's been remarkably low because they've done the right thing, they've taken the precautions, and that shows the expertise and the skills we've got in Nobles and throughout the healthcare sector.
Do you think we should still be wearing masks?
Yes, actually. I think we are now heading into a period of mitigation. What does that mean? We're saying, look, we've had lockdown, we've had Fortress Isle of Man, we've kept the barriers up to people coming and going at serious cost, both emotionally and personally, to a lot of people. I know that. And that's been successful in eradicating the virus, but also buying us time to get the vaccination schedule up and running. Now we're at a time where we have to live in a world where COVID is there, and a lot of scientists are saying this will now, it's never going to go away. This is now the reality that we will have COVID, and so we need to protect ourselves against it.
A lot of people don't quite understand when you say this is going to be our reality. Yeah. This is going to be because we've never lived like this before.
We haven't, but as Bill was saying, we've lived with influenza. We've lived with swine flu and bird flu. We've lived through periods where there has been real risks to ourselves, and we've accepted that at certain times of the year when people get on well, they can actually end up in hospital and unfortunately die of respiratory viruses. Now, I'm not saying we should be complacent about coronavirus. I'm certainly not saying, as some politicians said at the outset, oh, it's only a little flu. It's not. It's really serious. But we're now at a point whereby if we can get the whole population, or as much as the population as possible, including young people, vaccinated for this, we can treat it in a slightly nuanced way, and we can make sure that we don't overload our casualty departments, overload our ITU departments, and cripple our NHS at a time when it's trying to catch up with extensive waiting lists as well. So should people still wear masks when they're going into healthcare environments? Absolutely. We had 2 new cases of travellers coming back across yesterday. We know that sooner or later we will have perhaps outbreaks in our community. So we need to protect those very vulnerable people who are in hospital, but we also need to protect the staff and as well as the patients there, so they can serve us.
Do you think we're heading in the right direction? Do you think the strategy is right on the Isle of Man, the decision making?
I'm biased because it's been a massive privilege to be part of that. Yes. It's been an extremely difficult 12 months. We've had to make decisions as a government that we never expected we'd have to and never really wanted to, in terms of denying people their liberty to go backwards and forwards across the Irish Sea, in terms of intervening in people's home lives and personal lives in ways that would be inconceivable beforehand. But I think we've done as much as we can to now be at a stage where we can start stepping back as a government and let people make the right decisions for them, whether they want to wear a mask, whether they want to socially distance, but always be aware that threat of coronavirus, that threat of illness is still there. And as we open up the borders and have more people coming backwards and forwards, that threat will exist. But what we can do is say we've protected as many people as possible. And I'd really ask people, when they get the invitation to have the vaccine, particularly second dose, please take it up. If you've got any worries about second dose and side effects, have a chat to your GP, have a chat to your friends who've had it, because this is the way we get out of this situation, is if we can vaccinate all those people who are at risk of ending up in hospital.
OK, if you want to speak to Dr. Allinson, call 66 13 68. Lots of emails, lots of telephone calls to get to as well. And I think here's a message from the answer phone as well.
I'm Kelly Blanc, Secretary of the National Association of Head Teachers in the Isle of Man. I just wanted to offer some supportive words, if I could. When Dr. Allinson became Minister, everyone thought that the industrial dispute and professional unrest would be his main priority. However, after only a matter of weeks, a global crisis came along which changed everything. School closures, remote learning, lockdowns, all offered unforeseen challenges. And then on top of all of that, there's been a restructuring and cultural change in his department. New personnel at the top of desk, examination issues to resolve, a controversial education bill, and a whole array of other collateral from the dispute and COVID-19. So it's certainly been a very challenging time, and the agenda for an education minister has surely never been so demanding. So it would be interesting to hear some of the Minister's reflections on that. But I'm a firm believer that voices are often loudest when there are issues or perceived problems, but they should be equally loud when something good has happened. And Dr. Allinson has certainly navigated the way through each obstacle put in his place. So on behalf of a great many school leaders and head teachers, I would just say thank you and well done to the Minister for his leadership in these difficult times and for the steps taken since his appointment, which have proved very positive in terms of relationships with NAHT and bodes well for education in the Isle of Man.
I'm a little bit speechless because I didn't expect you to start off with that. I'd just like to thank Max for that message. He's right. I mean, I was, given the honour to be Minister for Education, Sport and Culture, and within 3 weeks the pandemic had hit. And I apologise because from then it's been a bit of a blur. And so I've been trying to deal with the quite apparent issues in the department when I took over. I went in with my eyes open. But also then deal with everything else. And what we're now at the position of doing is trying to get back to those basic tenets of the department, which are respect for the teaching profession, respect for pupils and their families, and helping support education throughout our island, whether that be the preschool, whether it be primary schools, and I wish Max and all his staff my best wishes with their because they're in a competition for best primary school in the United Kingdom. The Times Education Supplement have nominated them for that, and I hope they're successful in that, because he's right. Sometimes we concentrate on the negatives and we don't see the positives. We have some fantastic pupils on the Isle of Man. We have wonderful teachers. We have great schools. We have inspirational leaders in education. And from my point of view, it's been a real honour to work with these people during an incredibly stressful time for our whole island, but particularly for education, because they've been worried not only about the education of their pupils, but their health as well, and have dealt with it in an absolutely incredible way, whether that be in school or going out to them at home or through distance learning. And it's been an absolute privilege to work with the teachers on the Isle of Man over the last 12 months.
OK, we're live on Facebook, we're live on YouTube as well, streaming. If you want to see exactly what's happening, of course, we're broadcasting around the world as well with Dr. Alex Allinson, Education, Sport and Culture Minister. A question in from James, who just says, are there enough? Well, there was always been talk that there aren't enough teachers on the Isle of Man. Are there enough? And is there a churn factor? Are there as many people leaving as coming? What's the situation? Do we have enough teachers?
Do we have enough teachers? Probably not, to be honest with you. Is there a turnover of teachers? Yes, certainly. And again, teachers are very valuable. We're competing for some of the best teachers with the UK, with people all around the world. So we need to do two things. One, we need to recruit. We need to make teaching a really something you aspire to be. You aspire to make changes in other people's lives. So we need that recruitment. We need that training on Ireland. But also we need to retain those people we have here. I know, again, we were talking about the cost that people have paid with some of the border policies. I know teachers who have left because they've got family across, whether it's in the island of Ireland or the United Kingdom, who being deprived of being able to see those for a year, it's got too much for them and they've left. So we need to retain the staff here. We need to invest in them. We need to invest in their career development, but also look at particularly aspects of education that need extra resources and funding, such as additional educational needs, and make a concerted effort to make sure that as we come out of the pandemic, we learn the lessons, because I think the last 12 years have acted as a bit of a magnifying glass to show some of the disparities in our society, some of the inequalities that are here that laid underneath the surface. Now is the time to address those, and now is the time to invest in the future.
OK, Juan. Hello, Juan.
Good afternoon, Andy. Good afternoon, Alex.
Hello there.
Hi. A few questions I wanted to ask you. I'll try and get through them quickly because I know there'll be people waiting. David Ashford was on the other week and I asked him a question about an mRNA messenger operating system, and he said that there wasn't. I mean, you just said that there is. So can you just clarify that for the listeners? Is the vaccine an mRNA messenger?
It's a messenger RNA vaccine. So the AstraZeneca has got an antigen in it. This is just the messenger RNA. So what happens is it goes into when you have the vaccination, it goes into the cells, And that then causes the reproduction within those cells of the antigen that then our body responds to. So it's a different form of vaccine that we've used in the past, but it is a form of vaccine that's been developed over the last couple of years, particularly in terms of cancers. And now that it gives the ability to change it very slightly, hopefully to deal with some of the variants that we're seeing with coronavirus.
But it's still in an experimental stage?
Not at all.
Right, okay. Then the other question I wanted to ask you was, at the moment in the US, we're seeing Dr. Fauci is now getting questioned on gain of function, as this is supposed to have come out of a Wuhan lab. What's your thoughts on that?
That's a very good question, because we still, I think, don't know exactly where the index case was. It was initially traced to a wet market in Wuhan, but there have always been theories that because Wuhan has one of the largest coronavirus research facilities in China and possibly in the world, because of the caves that are nearby and the number of bats there, that it could have been a leak from the lab. I know the World Health Organization went over there, did an investigation. Okay, it was far later than they'd planned, and they came out with saying that they couldn't see any obvious link. But we saw during the week that President Biden has asked for another investigation as to whether that could have been a possibility. I think whether it was not man-made, but whether it was human error or act of nature, in some ways is a bit irrelevant because it's out there now. And what we need to do is make sure that leakage never happens again, either by closing down wet markets, looking at the way we interact with nature ecologically, or making sure that laboratories that have these sort of specimens in them are as secure as possible. But we've even seen in the UK, I think it was about a decade ago, a leakage of smallpox from Portland Down. These are really nasty viruses, and if you keep them for research purposes, can occasionally get loose.
How do you feel about yesterday morning? There was an interviewer on Good Morning TV who actually said that, or was saying to people that they should unfriend de-vaxxers. And I thought that's quite a bizarre thing to be saying, and I know there's a lot of complaints going into Ofcom about that. And this kind of mentality that's getting pushed out there is dividing the nation, because there's a lot of people who feel strongly about vaccinations for whatever reasons. Yeah. And for people who are employed by mainstream media to come out with that kind of rhetoric, I think is very divisive and is not helpful, and is going to divide the nation even more.
Yeah, I'm afraid I didn't watch that interview, but I tend to agree with you. People have very valid concerns about vaccination, full stop. They always have done, from the Jenner times in terms of smallpox vaccination. We've got an unprecedented development of new vaccines, and people rightly have questions about their safety, about the way they've been tested, and about the long-term effects. Some people are very hesitant about vaccines. Some people are very anti-vaccine, and there's a difference between the two. But personally, I think the only way to deal with those anxieties or those disagreements is by dialogue and by sharing information and by reasonable debate. And by explaining the situation rather than unfriending people or trying to marginalise people.
Joe, and what do you think of the anti-vaxxing lobby?
Well, I agree with what Alex just said there, and it's a pity really that the governments actually are not wanting to talk or debate with the other side, and purposely blocking their views. And I think it would be good for a TV program, a national TV program, for both sides to sit down and talk about it, because there's a huge amount of people who are against this and against everything that's going on around it. So, in fairness to both sides, rather than blacking them out and censoring it, which is what's happening, why don't they sit down around a table and then we can sort it out, and there would be, the people would be more in tune with what's going on and make their own mind up, in fairness.
But June, don't you think the debate over vaccines been resolved? I mean, I just asked Dr. Allinson to list which vaccines people get from when they're babies, and there's a dozen and more. And we all routinely have vaccines if we go into the Far East or any tropical place. So why do you think there's that anti-vax lobby still around?
Well, I totally agree with what you're saying on the vaccines, and they're tried and tested, but there seems to be a rhetoric here that there's not been, or they've evaded certain testing procedures on this. And as Alex has just said, this vaccine is a very new. This messenger system is very, very new. And obviously, there's different things coming up now with blood clots and the yellow card system. If you follow the reports on the yellow card system, there's a lot of reports. So obviously, people are nervous about it, and I think the truth is not, or the whole truth is being avoided. And this is what's causing a big problem out there. People want to know the truth because you're putting something in your body that you don't know about. I mean, how do you explain this that happened last week with people putting magnets on their arms? Dr. Allinson, what's your take on that one?
I'm not quite sure what you're talking about in terms of magnets, but I know that there are concerns, but what we've also had the last 12 months is isolation, and I think some people have actually gone down a wormhole on social media and YouTube. There is so much out there, which from my point of view is rubbish. I mean, claims are being made about what's in the vaccines, which defy scientific knowledge, which defy any of the facts. And now, I'm as I said, there are people who are hesitant about vaccines, but also, unfortunately, there are a very small minority of people who are anti-vaccine full stop and have used misinformation, have used conspiracy theories to try to perpetuate their own ideas. That I'm opposed to. Telling untruths, telling things that will not stack up to scientific investigation, I'm against. Saying that, the Director of Public Health has entered into extensive conversation with some people who are anti-vaccine, and they've tried to justify and explain certainly the Isle of Man government's position and the scientific position on these at length, and unfortunately haven't got through, but at least we've shared that information. And if you go on the website, again, all the information is available there as much as possible.
OK, all right, Jim, we're going to crack on. Thanks for calling.
Bye.
Good to talk to you. Here's a message. I knew this was going to happen. Kelly just said, can you ask Dr. Allinson what's happening with the flumes?
Absolutely. Yeah, what's happening with the flume? So in April, I stood up in Tynwald and said that we'd reached an agreement. We were getting the specialist contractors over. We were getting back on track with these. Unfortunately, the specialist contractor who is based in Scotland, then there were some very serious personal problems with one or two members of staff, and so that had to be postponed. We're trying to get that back on track. I've said that we will get the flumes back up and running for the summer holidays. That is still our intention, and as soon as we've got a definite timetable, I will give a statement back to Tynwald, and we'll make a public statement as well. All I can do is apologise, and I know after a while that gets very boring. We are trying to do our best to rectify this situation and try to get that facility back for all the people on the Isle of Man to enjoy.
Who's going to be the first person down the flumes when they open? Is it going to be you?
No. I have offered it to Jason Morehouse, MHK, because I think he's asked them the most questions about it. And I will be very honoured if you cut the ribbon, because every time I tune into Manx Radio, it is a flume-free Friday, Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday or Monday.
Guilty as charged. Here's a message from Rob about the NSC. Do we need an improvement in disability access sports? The NSC claims to be disability friendly, but they won't publish whether or not any of their instructors have disability-friendly qualifications.
Oh, that is a good one. We strive to be as inclusive as we can, not just at the NSC, but across the Isle of Man in terms of sport and recreation. And I know that the team there have been doing as much as they can to make sure all the staff are trained. Obviously, there are some obvious, simple adaptations, such as when you're going in and out of the swimming pool. But also we've looked at the estate, we've looked to make it as accessible as possible. They have had extensive training. And one of the things, in last summer was we had a cycle festival with people being encouraged to cycle around the NSC. And they had adaptive bikes there for children and people of all ages who had various disabilities, who for the first time could actually get out and get cycling with their friends and their family, which was fantastic to see.
We're with Dr. Alex Allinson till just before 1 o'clock today, of course, on the Mannin Line up until the general election. We're talking to all candidates. And today you're going to hear one of the candidates for Douglas South, Claire Christian, will be on just before the 1 o'clock news. But until then, if you want to speak to the doctor, call 66 13 68, text 166 177, SMS or email studio@manxradio.com.
Work has started to replace Pulrose Bridge to reduce the risk of flooding, improve the highway and protect vital infrastructure. Although the road is closed to traffic, all businesses and facilities in the area are open as normal. So please keep giving them your trade. Pulrose and its popular shops, Middle River Trading Estate, the Eastern Civic Amenity Site, Douglas Golf Club and the NSC are accessible through Newcastletown Road and Groves Road. Reach Riverside Trading Estate through the temporary entrance in Hills Meadow Trading Estate on Peel Road. The Bowl car park now has 2-hour disc parking and pedestrian access to Riverside is easy. Follow the diversion signs and please drive safely.
Select car sales remain open 7 days a week with access via Hills Meadow. See our Facebook page or website for our current stock selection. All cars come with warranty and zero deposit. Finance available from £15 per week.
Call Corkill Removals and Storage today. Loads big and small, day after day. We'll help you move, we'll help you pack. Whether local or global, we've got the knack, so give us a cheer. Yay! Your movers are here. They do it right.
As well as moving locally, nationally or internationally, we have storage solutions from as little as £12 per week. Call
675 495. We'll get your load delivered on time. You can be sure we'll get the job done. Click CorkillRemovals.com.
As we reflect on the year gone by, Harding Lewis would like to say how proud we are to support and advise local businesses. Being there for our clients to guide them through these challenging times has been rewarding and has strengthened our commitment to offer the highest level of service to the community. If you want to face the future with an experienced firm of chartered accountants as your business partner, visit hardinglewis.com or check out our Facebook page. See more, do more, together.
It all starts on Friday morning, Manx Radio's Mountain Memories. Relive the finest races, the closest finishes and the best tussles for the podium.
Sure to be a tremendous cheer here as he swings in for the third time this week as a victor, and here he comes.
Throughout what would have been race week, we'll be diving into our archives to bring you some of the very best TT commentaries, interviews and features from down the years.
There he is, what are we seeing on the screen? It's below 17!
You can listen on Manx Radio Digital online, on smartphone apps and smart speaker. On air Friday morning from 8 o'clock, Manx Radio's Mountain Memories, powered by Kawasaki K Options.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
Hello, Robert. You're live with Dr. Allinson.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Andy and Doctor. Just a couple of points about school uniform, if you don't mind me speaking about it. With regards to the uniforms which we have, the generic grey jumper and white shirt, which most of us can recall, has moved forward now to coloured jumpers for the under 11s in our primary schools. But these have, a logo motif on them. Yep. Now, that in itself looks good, but it's a wee bit kind of cost-effective towards helping a private sector grow a business. Now, I've just had to replace my boy's uniform. He's age 9, and we weren't short of £100 after the last lockdown going in forward now. That's head to toe from every shirt, every jumper, every pair of shorts and shoes, and his school coat he outgrew. So, as a family, we had to reissue. Now, the gentleman who sells the jerseys are £12. Now, online, for a blue generic jumper, I can get 3 for £10. My personal opinion should be that the Department of Education should standardise school uniforms again, because certain primary schools have got an elitist approach by not having a cotton T-shirt, going for a more sports T-shirt. Then there are more costs again back to the family. And forward going, by having it standardised, these embroidered logos, they're a nice to have, not a need to have. So my point is there, I think, would you consider going back to your educational body and basically saying to all the head teachers, we're going to drop them because we're helping a private company. Also, as well, it'll help mums and dads in their pockets. So that side of things would go. My second point would be is when we move towards secondary school, we then start to look at boys and girls going to school in their blazers on the first couple of weeks of term in September. They look as smart as a brand new pin, but those blazers then get hung up and forgotten about very, very quickly, and they will revert back to a jumper. My point forward going, and would like to see consideration being given for uniforms to be re-looked at, blazers done away with. Keep it as cost effective as possible for a household budget. And these logos and such, they're not needed. They're a nice to have. They're not a need to have.
Okay, Rob.
Yeah, Rob, thank you very much for that. And I think, as I said before, the stress over the last 12 months has revealed some of the problems, working families and parents have affording school uniforms. I think you're absolutely right. We're aware of the issues. I've been contacted by many parents about the cost of school uniforms, but also not just school uniforms. PE kits, branded PE kits with the logos on it, where you have a rugby shirt and then a hockey shirt and various shorts and socks, and they've all got their own logos. I would completely agree with you that these have to be affordable. What we're doing is working with head teachers. I met with the Educational Council, which is a collection of all the school governors as well, and said to them I'd like them to go back and look at the individual schools' uniform policy to make it as reasonable and affordable as possible.
Is this something you can mandate?
It's something I don't really want to mandate. I mean, when I took over as minister, it was very much that there was this feeling that the department was directing teachers, telling teachers what to do all the time, rather than letting them teach. And I think there is a huge opportunity here for head teachers, school governors, particularly parent governors, to feed in the feelings of the local school community and the local population into the way those schools are run, rather than somebody like myself dictate to people, which I will not do. But what we should do is recognise the issues here, recognise the cost of school uniforms, try to make sure that they are not, the cost itself is not excluding people or stigmatising people who have problems funding them, and look at it other ways of actually helping out those families who are struggling to afford it. So I agree with you that we need to look at this in a decent way. We need to take on board all people's problems and actually come up with a solution that's that fits the situation.
Okay. All right, Rob, thanks for calling.
I totally agree. Thanks very much. Thanks, Sam.
Okay, here's Bill with us on the Mannin Line. Hello, Bill. You're live with Dr. Allinson.
Oh, thank you very much. Hello, Dr. Allinson. I just want to ask a question. Both my children went to Scholar Jubilee, the infant site, and Murray's Road site. And we've been really surprised there's no changing facilities for the children when changing for PE, which can be quite embarrassing for the children, especially if they get up into the junior site. My daughter is just supposed to be 11 this Christmas, but they have to get changed under a table. Is that acceptable, do you think?
Well, Bill, thank you very much for raising that to me. I wasn't aware of issues at School Jubilee. Have you had a chance to talk to the parent governor there at the school and express your concerns about this?
I have, yeah, a few times
right.
To the head and to separate teachers, but they just say, well, it is what it is.
Okay.
I went to school in the 70s and we had changing rooms back then,
Yeah. No, I mean, thank you very much for raising it. As I said, I wasn't aware of the situation. When I finish today, I'll look into that.
Okay, thanks for calling us, Bill, today. Thanks for that point as well. We've had, throughout the course of the pandemic, we've had, Dr. Allinson, we've had mention of ivermectin and whether ivermectin is useful in combating the symptoms of coronavirus.
Yeah, what we saw last year was, being faced with a pandemic of a virus that we hadn't really dealt with before. We'd had antiviral agents for influenza, such as Tamiflu, but those don't actually work with coronavirus, so people were desperate to find a treatment that would work. There were lots of them tried. We had hydroxychloroquine, we've had vitamin D, remdesivir, plasma therapies, and also some, quite alternative drugs, shall we say. Ivermectin, if I'm pronouncing it right, I've never used as a doctor because it's used for worms, worm infestations. But there were studies, particularly in Africa, where they were trying to use whatever they had that showed it might be useful. Recently, in the United Kingdom, they've done some very good studies looking at these and actually showed no, it's not useful. It will not reduce the symptoms or the mortality rate of coronavirus. But what those studies have also shown, actually, is that some things do work. We've got a common steroid drug, dexamethasone, which significantly reduces the death rate. We've also looked at the way we treat people who are incredibly short of breath. At the beginning of the pandemic, people were put straight on ventilators with high-pressure oxygen, which actually probably did them more harm than good. Now people are using high-flow nasal oxygen or CPAP. And so what we've seen over the last year is the mortality rate for those people going into hospital with serious coronavirus infections has dropped by half. But we will continue to look at various treatments. And I know the British Prime Minister has announced a fund to look at antiviral treatments to try to get on top of this. OK, we're nearly out of time. Stephen, you're live with Dr. Allinson. Hello, Stephen.
Hello there, and good afternoon, listeners. Good afternoon, Dr. Allinson.
Good afternoon.
I wonder, could I bounce some things off you, please? As you will be aware, the DOI were unable to comply with a motion of Tynwald, which was to keep the horse trams running to the sea terminal. Now, does this mean that we are becoming a failed democracy if we can't have faith in motions that are unanimously passed in Tynwald and then not carried out? Are departments failing in their duty to be part of our democracy? Who ultimately is in charge or in control? We send representatives to Tynwald to make decisions on our behalf. But if departments do not carry out this will of Tynwald, are we becoming a failed democracy?
Well, thanks, Stephen. In answer to that, no, I don't think we're a failed democracy. I know that the DOI have struggled with the prom. That's quite obvious. And what Minister Baker came back to the House with was very much that, given the time schedule now and the desperate need to finish it, and given also the financial situation with the overruns, that they were going to put on hold the extension of the horse trams to the sea terminal and revisit that at a later date. All the preparations are there to put it in, but it will be coming back to Tynwald, probably for approval, theoretically, of more money to complete that work. I think he was honest about that. I think he was honest about the problems involved with the scheme. And I think he was honest that actually the scheme, as approved by Tynwald, was becoming incredibly difficult to deliver within the time scale that he'd originally envisaged. And that's even, we're not blaming coronavirus. It's been an incredibly complicated scheme. And I know he's apologised for that in the past. So I don't think it's a failed democracy. Where the responsibility lies in our current structure is with the minister. It's with Tim Baker having to stand up and be questioned really quite extensively on this by representatives from all the other, constituencies. Okay. Final word, Stephen?
Well, I disagree entirely with what the doctor said. I'll give you another example. Over the Coroner Home in Peel, the minister, up until the motion of Tynwald, was arguing vociferously against any help. And the chief executive Catherine Magson, was not offering any help. And so we have a department that was not offering any help until the motion of Tynwald, but now, from what I can gather from the negotiations, is frustrating the negotiations and encouraging the clock to tick down. Now, if the Department of Health and Social Care do not comply with the terms of the urgent motion and this home closes, that to me is another example of democracy failing, and I have no faith in you or any other member of Comyn to ensure that the will of Tynwald is complied with.
But okay. Stephen, what I'd say there is that I think the Department of Health and Social Care said this is a private home, it's run by a charity, it's not in our remit to intervene in that without being asked, obviously, by the trustees themselves. Then Tynwald changed that policy. Tynwald dictated to DHSC that they should get involved, and that's what's happened. What we now have is a period, I think, of 6 months to see if it can be turned around, see if it can carry on existing. OK. Thank you, Stephen, for calling today. We're just about out of time with Dr. Allinson.
You're a super carer. Ben, my foster child, said to me, "You make me feel like part of the family." In truth, every child I fostered is a superhero to overcome sad times and be happy and confident again. If you can make a child or young person feel like part of your family, call the Family Placement Service on 610000. That's 610000. Or email familyplacementservice@gov.im. Superheroes need super carers.
Want to work with professional West End actors? And perform before an audience on a real stage? The Stage Ed West End Summer School will run at Ballacamine High School and is booking now, with classes for 6 to 10-year-olds and 11 to 18s. This July and August, spend a week working with musical theatre pros, then strut your stuff on stage in front of family and friends. Search Stage Ed Holiday Schools online for details. Get ready to put on your greatest show. Supported by the Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Athol Garage in Ballasalla is more than a Nissan authorised repair centre. Their team of highly factory-trained and experienced technicians will service and repair any make and model, with dedicated aftercare too. With Athol, you get a competitive fixed-price menu and a courtesy car if needed. Pity this driver didn't know that.
Oh, great! I told you to go to Athol!
Athol, a garage to swear by, not swear at. Book now at athol.im or call the 18 82 0082.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
We've been with Dr. Alex Allinson today for the past hour or so. Thanks for being with us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure as ever.
Good to talk to you. And standing, of course, for Keys in Ramsey.
Yes, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, and actually I think on the back of everything that we've been through the last 12 months, huge amounts of opportunities to really address some of the inequalities in our society and make real meaningful change for people.
Okay, thanks for being with us today. Good to talk
to you. Thank you very much.
The Isle of Man